Taehyung forgets to mention Jungkook in his wedding vows, leaving fans stunned. What happened between them? A heartbreaking secret unfolds. I, Kim Taehyung, promise to cherish you forever. His voice rang across the garden filled with white roses and silent hearts. Through every storm, through every joy. But he stopped there. He didn't say his name, Jungkook, not even once. The silence was brief, but for Jungkook, it was endless. The camera didn't catch it, but everyone in the front row saw how his smile faltered. He was seated just behind the bride's family, in an all-black suit, hands clenched under the bouquet of pale lilies on his lap. His lips parted slightly, almost to whisper something, but he never did. The garden was bright with golden sunlight, and yet, he felt like he couldn't see. Taehyung looked calm, radiant even, his hand holding his bride's. But Jungkook's ears buzzed with static, the world too loud and yet too quiet. His vision blurred not because he was crying, but because he refused to. Because if he blinked, the tears would fall. And if they fell, everyone would know. They'd know what even Taehyung had forgotten. The vows ended. The crowd applauded. The petals rained down from the canopies overhead. A perfect moment. A perfect wedding. Except for the name that was never spoken. The reception began in a hall framed with soft candlelight and the scent of jasmine. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and Taehyung spun his bride in the middle of the room. Jungkook watched from the far end of the banquet table, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand, the bubbles long dead. He didn't realize how long he had been staring until Jimin nudged him under the table. "Hey," Jimin whispered. "You okay?" Jungkook blinked, then smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn on stage countless times. The one fans believed. "Yeah," he said. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" But Jimin's eyes didn't believe him. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and a soft acoustic song played, the MC invited close friends to come forward and share their wishes. Taehyung turned, smiling, gesturing for someone specific. "Jungkook," he called. "Say something, man." All eyes turned to him. Jungkook stood slowly, his legs almost refusing to cooperate. He walked to the front with a steady pace, his heart doing anything but. The mic felt cold in his hand. The stage was too bright. Taehyung stood beside him, looking too happy, too oblivious. Jungkook took a deep breath. "I've known Taehyung for over a decade," he began, his voice steady but soft. "And in all that time, I thought I knew what today would feel like. I thought I'd feel proud. I do, but it also hurts, because I realized something today. Sometimes the people we stand beside the longest forget to see us standing there." The room went still. Taehyung's smile faded, slowly, almost imperceptibly. His bride reached for his hand, but his fingers didn't move. Jungkook turned toward him. "I'm happy for you, Tae. I really am. I just wish you remembered me when it mattered most." He didn't wait for applause. He didn't even wait for the song to end. He placed the mic on the stand and walked out of the hall as cameras flashed, and whispers trailed him like ghosts. Behind him, Taehyung stared at the doorway, unmoving. After the wedding, fan accounts exploded. Armies were confused. Some furious, some heartbroken. Number he didn't say Jungkook trended for 48 hours. Fan edits juxtaposed Taehyung's wedding footage with old clips of Jungkook adjusting his mic for Taehyung, of their laughter backstage, of that one performance where Jungkook looked at Taehyung too long when singing "I'll Be There." HYBE released no statement, neither did Taehyung. But Jungkook disappeared from social media for 2 weeks. It was in a hidden cafe, tucked between alleys in Itaewon, where they finally saw each other again. Jimin had tricked them both, invited each to catch up at different times, only to vanish when they arrived. Jungkook entered first, then Taehyung. Their eyes locked across the wooden floor. "You look tired," Taehyung said first, taking the seat opposite. Jungkook stared. "You look married." A pause. A chuckle that never reached Taehyung's eyes. "I didn't mean to forget." "You didn't forget," Jungkook replied. "You chose not to say it." Taehyung lowered his gaze. His hand fidgeted with the edge of the coaster. "I thought if I said your name, I wouldn't be able to get through it. I thought I'd break." Jungkook leaned forward. "Then maybe you should have." The silence between them was old, familiar. The kind that carried 10 years of shared dressing rooms, long flights, tearful nights, silent glances. It wasn't the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who knew too much and said too little. "You are more than my friend," Taehyung whispered. "I know," Jungkook replied. "You were my safe place. I still am. But maybe not for much longer." The door chimed as a customer entered. Neither of them moved. Taehyung finally spoke. "I said vows for a future. But you were my past. You were..." He stopped. "You were the reason I knew how to love." Jungkook stood. "Then maybe next time, you'll say my name." He walked away again. But this time, Taehyung didn't just stand there. He followed, out the door, into the rain that had just begun to fall. "Wait!" Taehyung called out. Jungkook stopped, but didn't turn. "I don't know if I made the right choice," Jungkook whispered. "You did. That's why it hurts." Their umbrellas never opened. They stood soaked in the middle of a narrow street. And for a moment, just one, it felt like everything else disappeared except the rain and the memory of a name left unsaid. But life didn't pause. Taehyung went home to his wife. Jungkook went back to the studio. And armies still wondered what really happened that day. Because in the thousands of words Taehyung said on the happiest day of his life, there was one name missing. And that name echoed louder than anything else. The rain had long stopped, but the weight of it still clung to Jungkook's shoulders like a ghost that refused to leave. Days passed, then weeks, and yet he couldn't shake off the sound of Taehyung's voice trembling under the night sky, saying, "I don't know if I made the right choice." That sentence had folded itself into Jungkook's bones, wrapped around his breath, lingered in the way he played melodies at 3 a.m. alone in the studio. He didn't talk about it. Not to Jimin, not to Namjoon, not even to his manager who noticed he had canceled 3 dance practices in a row and had started turning off his phone during the day. Silence became his comfort and his punishment. He told himself it was better this way, that whatever Taehyung meant with those words, they were said too late and meant nothing now. But his heart hadn't received that memo. It still paused when he saw wedding photos online. It still broke a little more each time fans posted old clips of the two of them laughing over nothing. It still searched for a face in crowds that wasn't supposed to be searched for anymore. Jungkook sat in his apartment in the dim glow of dawn, staring at the untouched breakfast in front of him. His eggs were cold. The toast was still whole. His coffee had turned bitter. He hadn't eaten much in days. Across the room, his cat nudged the curtain aside to bat at the morning light. He watched her for a moment, envying how simple her world was. No vows, no betrayal, no names left unsaid, just hunger and sleep and instinct. He rose slowly, grabbed his hoodie, and left the apartment without brushing his hair or even checking the weather. He didn't care. He just needed to move. It wasn't until he was already in front of the studio that he realized where his feet had taken him. The same place where it all began. The place where he and Taehyung had stayed late nights writing songs they never released, playing chords they never recorded, talking about dreams they never dared admit in public. He walked past the receptionist, gave a tired smile, and stepped into the practice room without turning on the lights. The sun was enough. Just a sliver of it cutting through the blinds, falling on the piano in the corner. He sat on the bench and rested his fingers on the keys, but didn't press down. Not yet. He thought about the first time Taehyung taught him how to slow down. How they once danced barefoot in this very room after hours. Music echoing through the walls. Just the two of them and a shared silence that felt more intimate than any words. He remembered Taehyung humming a tune behind him while he played chords. He remembered how they never finished that song. He remembered how he never asked why. With a breath, Jungkook pressed a single note, then another. Slowly, the melody returned. That unfinished song. That aching harmony. The room filled with something raw, something tender, something that might have been love once, but was now just memory disguised as music. As he played, the door creaked open. Jungkook didn't look up. He already knew. Taehyung stood there, eyes shadowed, suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair tousled like he hadn't slept properly in days. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched, hands clenching at his sides. When the last note faded, Jungkook didn't say anything either. The silence between them returned, vast and thick, but no longer peaceful. It was sharp now, like glass. I didn't come to fight, Taehyung finally said, voice hoarse. Then why are you here? Jungkook replied without turning. Taehyung took a hesitant step forward. Because you walked out, and you haven't answered my calls. You didn't say my name, Jungkook said, finally standing and facing him. On your wedding day, you had one chance, one moment, and you didn't. Taehyung's jaw clenched. I told you why. Jungkook laughed, bitter and soft. No, you told me you were scared. That's not the same as forgetting. That's not the same as love. I loved you, Taehyung said. You know that. You of all people. I thought I did, Jungkook cut in, stepping closer. But then I saw you standing there, saying forever to someone else. And it hit me maybe I was just a chapter you were too scared to write the ending for. Taehyung looked away, shame flickering across his face. I was trying to protect us. From what? Jungkook asked, voice rising. From the truth? From yourself? No, Taehyung whispered. From everything. From the fans, the company. From ruining both our lives. But you ruined us anyway, Jungkook said, voice breaking now. You erased me, in front of everyone. And I sat there, pretending not to care. Taehyung reached out, but Jungkook flinched. Don't, he said. Don't touch me like you still have the right. Taehyung's hand fell. The silence returned. Longer this time. More brutal. I thought it would be easier, Taehyung said, eyes shining. If I chose the safe path. If I married her and gave everyone the version of me they wanted. Was it? Jungkook asked. Taehyung shook his head slowly. Then why did you do it? Jungkook whispered. Because I was a coward, Taehyung said. Because I didn't believe we could survive it. Because I didn't think love was enough. Jungkook laughed again, but it was a sound without joy. You were wrong. It was. They didn't speak after that. They just stood there. Two shadows in a sunlit room, surrounded by ghosts of what could have been. Jungkook turned first, picking up his bag, walking to the door. I'm leaving for Paris, he said. Taehyung blinked. For how long? I don't know. Are you running from me? I'm running from the version of myself who waited, Jungkook said. Who believed, who kept hoping. Taehyung didn't stop him. He couldn't, because he knew he didn't have the right anymore. That night, Jungkook boarded the flight without telling anyone. He didn't post on Weverse. He didn't update his location. He just disappeared, and the world kept spinning. But Taehyung's world didn't. His wife noticed. His team noticed. The fans noticed too, because Taehyung stopped smiling the same way. He sang, but his eyes were hollow. He danced, but it lacked soul. And during his next live, when someone asked, "Where's Jungkook these days?" he paused, then ended the stream mid-sentence. In Paris, Jungkook found solace in anonymity. No cameras, no expectations, just cafes and strangers and the distant hum of street music. He started drawing again, not faces, just feelings. He stopped replying to messages. He stopped opening the app. He needed silence. And for once, it didn't hurt. But some nights, he still dreamed of a voice saying his name, of vows that could have included him, of a version of life where Taehyung had been brave. And sometimes, just before sleep pulled him under, he whispered it back, for no one to hear but himself. Under the muted gray skies of Paris, Jungkook began walking as if movement itself could help him forget. The streets were foreign but comforting in their indifference. No one looked twice at the man in the oversized hoodie with headphones wrapped around his neck and a camera slung across his chest. He became a nameless figure drifting through Montmartre, through alleyways where ivy crept over the walls and street artists painted dreams on brick. Sometimes he'd sit outside cafes just to watch people speak in languages he didn't understand. It helped him tune out the voice in his head that still sounded too much like Taehyung. It was in a small bookstore near the Seine where he found a sketchpad and began to fill it, page after page, with vague silhouettes. None of them had faces. But every one of them had that same posture, shoulders tilted inwards, hands half raised as if caught between holding on and letting go. At night, he returned to the apartment he rented above a florist. The smell of lavender always lingered in the stairwell. He kept the lights dim, played music on vinyl, and stared out the window as if expecting someone to find him even here. But no one did. That was the point. Until one day, the silence broke. A knock on the door. Gentle, hesitant, almost like it didn't want to be heard. Jungkook paused, pencil in hand, eyes flickering toward the clock. It was past midnight. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. He rose slowly, the wooden floor creaking beneath him. When he opened the door, he didn't breathe. Taehyung stood there, soaked in rain, black coat clinging to him, suitcase behind him, and eyes filled with something desperate and raw. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Jungkook stepped aside. The door closed behind them, and the silence between them grew heavier with every heartbeat. Taehyung didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room, dripping on the floor, looking at the sketches pinned to the wall. "You left," he said quietly. "You made it easy," Jungkook replied, voice low. "I tried to forget," Taehyung said. "I tried to make it work. I tried to believe that what I did was right. But every day since that wedding, I've woken up feeling like I buried the wrong part of me." Jungkook turned, his expression unreadable. "And you think showing up here makes it better?" "No," Taehyung admitted. "But not showing up would have made it worse." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. His hands trembled as he extended it. "I wrote them," he whispered. "The vows I never said. The ones with your name." Jungkook hesitated before taking it. He unfolded the page slowly, his eyes scanning each word. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, elegant. He read it in silence. Every line was a wound reopening. Every confession was a ghost resurrected. "I promised to never forget the boy who stayed with me through every storm. The boy whose laughter healed me when even music couldn't. The one I turned to without thinking. The one I leaned on without shame. I promised to never forget the way he looked at me when the world turned dark. Like I was still someone worth believing in." The tears came without warning. Jungkook didn't try to stop them. "I didn't say them," Taehyung choked out. "But I wrote them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my dressing room alone while everyone was celebrating, and I wrote your name 100 times, but I still couldn't say it." Jungkook dropped the paper. "I don't want words anymore," he said. "I wanted them when they mattered. I wanted to hear my name when the world was watching. I wanted you to be brave, Taehyung. I waited for you to be brave." "I'm here now," Taehyung said. "I left everything. She knows, everyone knows. I couldn't keep living a life built on silence." Jungkook stared at him, tears still falling. "And what do you want from me now?" "Nothing," Taehyung whispered. "I just wanted you to know that I never stopped choosing you. I was just too afraid to say it out loud." Jungkook turned away, his hands shaking. "You think this is love? You think showing up now erases everything? The nights I stayed up wondering what I did wrong? The look on your face when you held her hand instead of mine? The sound of my name missing in a room full of promises? I think this is regret," Taehyung said. "And I think regret is all I deserve." For a long moment, there was no sound but the ticking clock and the rain tapping against the windows. Then Jungkook spoke, voice quieter than ever. "I loved you," he said. "More than I've ever loved anyone. And the worst part is I still do." Taehyung's breath hitched. "But I don't know if I can forgive you," Jungkook continued. "Because you didn't just break my heart. You broke the part of me that believed we were worth it." Taehyung stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile. "Then let me stay," he said. "Not to be forgiven, not to be loved back, just to be near you, just to remind you that I never forgot, even when I pretended I did." Jungkook didn't answer. He sat on the couch, head in his hands, shoulders trembling. Taehyung stood there in silence, not daring to move closer. That night, they didn't sleep. Taehyung stayed on the floor, back against the wall. Jungkook sat by the window, watching the rain. Neither spoke, but somehow, something unspoken passed between them. A small thread, a beginning, or maybe just the end of pretending. The days that followed were fragile. They didn't fall into old rhythms. There were no shared breakfasts or long walks. But Taehyung stayed, and Jungkook didn't ask him to leave. That was something. At night, they sat in the same room, not always talking, but always present. Once, Taehyung found a sketch Jungkook had hidden behind a book. It was of him, alone on a stage, microphone in hand, but the audience was empty, and his eyes were hollow. "I don't remember this moment," Taehyung said. "It hasn't happened yet," Jungkook replied. They looked at each other for a long time. Taehyung began writing again. He left poems on the kitchen table, half-finished lyrics on scraps of receipts. Jungkook read them all, said nothing. But he started humming in the shower again, started cooking small meals, started buying fresh flowers. One morning, Taehyung entered the studio and found a new song loaded onto Jungkook's computer. It was untitled, but he knew the melody. It was the one they never finished. The final verse had changed. It was no longer about being forgotten. It was about remembering despite the silence. And when Taehyung pressed play, he heard his name sung low, soft, but unmistakably there. In the city of light, among strangers and silence, something that once shattered was quietly being pieced together. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but honestly. And sometimes, that's enough. Of course. Please give me a moment to write the full continuation with immersive, uninterrupted long-form prose in English, just like the previous part. Since this next chapter will be very long and deeply detailed, I will continue immediately in the next reply. Jungkook didn't notice when the seasons began to change, but the air in Paris turned softer, warmer, touched by the distant promise of spring. Days grew longer, evenings more golden. And yet the quiet between him and Taehyung remained the same, delicate, undefined, like a fragile truce neither dared to name. But something had shifted. It wasn't in grand gestures or sudden declarations, but in the tiny, almost imperceptible things that lingered between them. Taehyung folding Jungkook's hoodie and placing it on the chair instead of leaving it on the floor. Jungkook setting an extra bowl of rice at dinner without being asked. They existed beside each other in a rhythm they hadn't chosen, but one they had slipped into like muscle memory. And then, one morning, Jungkook opened the door to find a delivery box. He hadn't ordered anything, but the sender was familiar. Hybe. Inside was an invitation, elegant, embossed, with golden trim. A gala event in Seoul. A reunion. A celebration of the past 10 years. A room full of faces they once shared every stage with. Jungkook stared at it for a long time, thumb running over the date, the location, the silent pull of something that felt like the past asking for one last bow. When Taehyung entered the room and saw the invitation on the table, he didn't ask. He already knew. "You going?" he said after a long pause. Jungkook didn't answer right away. "Do you think I should?" "That's not a question I can answer anymore," Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook glanced at him. "But you'll be there." "Yes," Taehyung said. "I have to be." "Because of her?" Jungkook asked, voice lower. Taehyung's eyes flickered. "Because of everything. The band, the label, the fans." Jungkook looked away, the words tightening in his throat. "Then maybe I shouldn't go." Taehyung stepped closer. "But you were part of all of it too." "Was I?" Jungkook asked. "When even you forgot to say my name on the most important day of your life?" The silence that followed was sharp, heavy with things they'd both tried to bury. But this time, Taehyung didn't retreat. He crossed the room slowly and sat across from Jungkook, folding his hands. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you think I didn't want to say it? That I didn't rehearse it 100 times in my head? That I didn't choke on it because I was terrified that once I said your name, I wouldn't be able to say hers?" Jungkook met his gaze. "Then why didn't you stop the wedding?" Taehyung inhaled shakily. "Because I thought I owed the world something. I thought duty came before desire. That pleasing everyone else would eventually teach me to live with myself." "And did it?" Jungkook asked. "No," Taehyung said. "It hollowed me out." Jungkook stood abruptly, walking to the window. The sky was cloudy, birds flying low, the city slowly waking beneath them. "I don't know if I have the strength to go back to that place," he whispered. "Not with all of them watching, not knowing what we were, what we broke." Taehyung rose, walked to stand beside him. "Then let them see," he said. "Let them see us. Whatever we are now, let them see that even after everything, we're still standing." Jungkook turned toward him. "Together? If you'll let me," Taehyung replied. And so, when the day came, they flew to Seoul. The airport was chaos, reporters, fans, flashing lights. But they moved quietly, side by side, with heads down and hearts clenched. It was the first time they had been seen together in public since the wedding, and the rumors reignited like wildfire. Taekook reunion? Why now? Where is his wife? Why does Jungkook look so thin? They didn't answer. They didn't need to. The night of the gala arrived. The venue was exquisite crystal chandeliers, sweeping staircases, every face familiar but distant. Jungkook wore a black velvet suit, tailored perfectly, understated but striking. Taehyung arrived later, dressed in cream, timeless and ethereal. When they locked eyes across the room, it was like the entire past 10 years condensed into one breath. People approached them separately. Greetings, nostalgia, laughter that didn't reach their eyes. But Jungkook kept glancing toward him, toward the man who once promised him the moon in a backstage hallway and then broke him in front of the world. Later in the evening, the host called them to the stage BTS together again. Cameras flashed. Applause erupted. The other members were there too, smiling, hugging, trying to hold on to the moment. But Jungkook could feel Taehyung's presence at his side like gravity. He could hear his heartbeat louder than the cheers.
And then came the moment. The speech. Each member said something about growth, about music, about brotherhood. When it was Taehyung's turn, he stepped to the mic slowly, hands shaking. I was told to talk about what I'm most grateful for, he began. And I thought about a lot of things, my family, my fans, my team. He paused, looking out into the sea of faces. But if I'm being honest, the thing I'm most grateful for is the person I failed. The room quieted. I stood here months ago and said vows to someone else, and I meant them. I won't pretend otherwise. But there was a name I should have said too, a name that's been a part of my life longer than most people here, a name that's tied to every late night in the studio, every backstage prayer, every time I doubted myself and someone reminded me who I was. The audience was still. That name is Jungkook. Gasps. Jungkook froze. And I'm saying it now, Taehyung continued, voice trembling, because love isn't always perfect, and sometimes we break the things we love the most out of fear, but I don't want to be afraid anymore. Jungkook didn't move, couldn't breathe. When Taehyung stepped down, the applause was hesitant, confused, emotional, but none of it mattered, because Jungkook wasn't hearing the crowd. He was hearing the words he'd waited too long to hear. After the event, in the back hallway behind the venue, Taehyung found him. You said it, Jungkook whispered, his voice hoarse. I should have said it a long time ago, Taehyung said, but this time I didn't forget. Jungkook looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, he stepped forward, rested his forehead against Taehyung's chest. You broke me, he whispered, but you also built me. Taehyung wrapped his arms around him. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that second chance, he said. And there, away from the lights, away from the cameras, they stood, two people who had lost each other, found each other, and decided that maybe the future didn't need to be loud. Maybe it just needed to be real. Because sometimes the most powerful vows are the ones spoken after everything has already shattered. And this time, Jungkook's name wasn't forgotten. It was carved into the air, into the silence, into the only place it had ever truly needed to live. Taehyung's heart, the night after the gala, was suffocating, not because of the crowd or the press, but because of the aftermath that lived in the silence between hotel walls, in the way Jungkook lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling while Taehyung sat just meters away on the balcony, smoking a cigarette he hadn't touched in years. The air between them wasn't filled with anger anymore. It was thick with something older, something heavier, something that carried every second they lost. Neither of them spoke, but the city below did, cars humming, distant laughter rising from sidewalks, muffled music echoing through neon. Jungkook listened to all of it, but only truly heard the sound of his own breath and Taehyung's occasional exhale of smoke. Eventually, Taehyung turned, silhouetted by the glass, and asked quietly, "Do you regret coming back?" Jungkook's eyes met his through the darkness. "Do you?" Taehyung didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jungkook stood and crossed the room barefoot, the floor cold beneath him. He slid open the glass door and stepped onto the balcony, the wind brushing his hair back. He took the cigarette from Taehyung's fingers and dropped it into the ashtray. "You quit," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung's lips curved into a faint, guilty smile. Only forgot for a moment. Seems like you forget a lot of things. There was no venom in his voice, only sadness. Taehyung nodded slowly. I know. They stood there side by side looking down at Seoul, a city they had once owned, a city that now looked too big to belong to anyone. The skyline blinked with artificial stars. Jungkook's hand rested against the railing, inches from Taehyung's but not touching. That invisible distance between them, always almost, never quite, was both a boundary and a bridge. You saying my name up there, Jungkook began, voice low, steady. You realize that changed everything. I wanted it to, Taehyung whispered. I meant it too. And her, Jungkook asked, does she hate me now? She doesn't hate you, Taehyung said, eyes dark and unreadable. She hates me. Because of me. No, Taehyung answered, because of the truth. Jungkook exhaled shakily. Are you still married? Taehyung didn't lie, not anymore. Silence. The word sat between them like a confession. It didn't bring relief, it brought gravity. She deserves someone who doesn't flinch every time he sees another face in the crowd, Taehyung added. Someone who doesn't check every room hopping for someone else to be there. Jungkook closed his eyes. Did she know? Of course, Taehyung replied. I think everyone knew, even before I did. Jungkook looked down at his hands. You told the whole world last night. Taehyung's voice was quiet but firm. I needed to, not for them, for you. Jungkook finally turned to face him. So what now? You said it. You stood on that stage and said my name like it was sacred. What do you expect me to do with that? Taehyung stepped closer, and for once, he didn't stop just before touching. He took Jungkook's hand in his, threading their fingers together slowly, as if testing the strength of something old, fragile, once broken. I expect nothing, Taehyung said, but I hope you'll let me try, not to fix what I ruined, but to build something new with you. Jungkook didn't pull away. His thumb brushed over the back of Taehyung's hand absent-mindedly, and his chest ached in a way that wasn't pain but memory. The echo of too many almosts. You once told me I was your safe place, Jungkook whispered. You looked me in the eyes backstage before we went on tour and said, if I fall apart, just look at me and I'll come back. Do you remember? Taehyung's voice broke. I never forgot. Jungkook's eyes shimmered in the city's glow. Then don't leave this time, not when it gets complicated, not when it gets loud. Stay. Taehyung didn't hesitate. I will. And for the first time in years, they stayed in the same room, not out of obligation or accident but choice. That night, they didn't sleep far apart. Jungkook rested against Taehyung's shoulder and Taehyung didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, afraid that even a shift would shatter the fragile moment they had finally stepped into. They didn't kiss. They didn't speak, but their hands never let go. Morning came with the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. Jungkook stirred first, eyes adjusting to the soft light. Taehyung was already awake, watching him. You always wake up early, Jungkook murmured, voice hoarse. I was afraid it was a dream. Jungkook smiled faintly. It is. They returned to Paris a few days later, both of them changed. Not fixed, not healed, but open. They walked the same streets, but this time side by side. They bought fresh fruit from the market and argued over which wine to bring home. They stayed up late, watching films on the couch, Taehyung falling asleep with his head on Jungkook's lap, while Jungkook traced lazy circles on his shoulder. The world outside kept spinning, but theirs slowed down. It softened. When Jungkook finally returned to the studio, he brought Taehyung with him, not as a guest, as a voice. They recorded together again, not because the label told them to, but because they wanted to remember what it sounded like to trust each other. The first song was raw, almost a whisper. Jungkook on piano, Taehyung on guitar. No production, no layers, just them. The lyrics didn't explain everything, but they didn't have to. The emotion did. Armies cried when the teaser dropped. The clip of them laughing in the studio, of Taehyung resting his head on Jungkook's shoulder, of Jungkook's fingers brushing against Taehyung's wrist as he reached for the mic. It was subtle, intimate, unapologetic. And when the song released, it was called His Name. The lyrics were simple. I forgot to say your name, but it was always written on my bones. Even when I lied, even when I smiled, you were the only truth I ever called home. The internet exploded. People called it a confession. Others called it closure. But for them, it was neither. It was a beginning. A soft beginning that didn't promise a perfect future, but a shared one. And one night, months later, Jungkook stood on the same stage where Taehyung once said his name. The crowd was quiet, the lights warm, and he looked out across the faces with steady eyes. I thought love had to be loud to matter, he said into the mic. But sometimes it's the silence that proves it never left. He turned, reached out his hand, and Taehyung joined him, fingers laced with his. No more hidden songs. No more unsaid vows. And this time when Jungkook sang, he said the name too. Not once, not in passing. He sang it like it was his own. Taehyung. The song echoed long after the stage lights dimmed and the crowd's roar softened into memory. It wasn't the melody that lingered, it was the moment. The way Jungkook had looked at Taehyung as he sang his name, not with hesitation or hurt anymore, but with something steadier, deeper, fuller. As if every unsaid word from the years they'd lost had finally folded itself into a single note. And Taehyung, standing beside him with his heart visible in his eyes, hadn't flinched. He'd received it all, the weight, the warmth, the wonder, and had stayed. They left the stage hand in hand, not as an act, not as a headline, but as two men who had lived through a war neither had spoken of in interviews. Backstage, the silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was reverent. It was sacred. Jungkook leaned against the dressing room wall, head tilted back, breathing in deeply like the weight on his chest had finally lifted. Taehyung sat across from him on the velvet couch, his fingers still trembling faintly, though he tried to hide it by pressing his palms flat against his knees. Their eyes met. No words passed. They didn't need to. Later, when the others came in, Jimin with his proud grin, Namjoon with misty eyes, Yoongi offering a quiet nod of approval, the room filled with laughter again. But it wasn't like before. It wasn't nostalgic. It was present. It was alive. And for once, Jungkook didn't feel like he was pretending. Taehyung didn't look like he was searching for a version of himself that fit. When they returned to Paris days later, it wasn't to hide. It was to rest, to grow, to learn each other again, not as boys who once shared dreams on tour buses and backstage corridors, but as men who had broken each other and still chosen to stay. The apartment above the florist felt different now. It wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a home. Taehyung began painting again, often in the morning when the sun spilled across the wooden floor, shirt sleeves rolled up and hair messy, humming to himself while soft music played. Jungkook would watch from the kitchen, coffee in hand, sketching melodies with his eyes closed. He wrote songs without pressure, sang into the walls without fear. They learned each other's routines, Taehyung needing silence in the morning, Jungkook cooking late at night when insomnia whispered. They argued about ridiculous things, how much chili powder belonged in stew, whether a song needed one more harmony layer, whether the cat preferred the windows open or not. But they also shared things they never had before. Jungkook's habit of leaving notes tucked into Taehyung's books. Taehyung's quiet way of reaching for Jungkook's hand when his own anxiety made his chest tight. The days weren't dramatic. There were no grand declarations, but it was in the little things. In the way Taehyung leaned into Jungkook's shoulder while watching old films. In the way Jungkook gently pushed Taehyung's hair behind his ear when it fell into his eyes as he painted. In the way they remembered birthdays without being reminded. In the way they looked at each other when the world forgot to. Then came the letter. It arrived one afternoon, slipped under the door in a cream envelope with gold trim. From HYBE, a request. A final tribute concert, BTS, Legacy, one night, one city, One last stage, all 7 together. Jungkook held it in his hands, eyes scanning the words slowly. Taehyung stepped behind him, reading over his shoulder. Neither spoke for a moment. Soul, Jungkook murmured. Taehyung nodded. They wanted to be the last. And us, Taehyung asked, are we ready for that? Jungkook turned, met his eyes. Only if we go together. And so they returned. The stadium was full, 70,000 strong. A sea of lights, of voices, of love that hadn't wavered with time. The energy was overwhelming, like the past and present colliding all at once. The rehearsal was brief. They didn't need much. The choreography was muscle memory. The lyrics etched into their bones. But when the moment came, when the lights went out and the roar began, it wasn't the set list that mattered. It was the story behind every step. They performed the classics, the anthems, the songs that had shaped a generation. But midway through, Jungkook took the mic alone. The stage dimmed, the spotlight found him, and the crowd hushed. I used to think love had to be quiet, he said, voice carrying across the silence. That it was safer that way, that if I kept it inside it couldn't be broken, but I was wrong. Love isn't safe, it's brave. He turned, and Taehyung stepped onto the stage. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. They sang. Together. A song not from an album, not from the label. Their song. The one they had written in Paris. The one built from silence, from pain, from memory. The screen behind them displayed only one word, name. And when they finished, Taehyung pulled Jungkook into a silent embrace. The kind that didn't ask for applause, the kind that simply existed, real, true. The stadium wept. After the concert, they disappeared again, not out of shame, not out of fear, but because they'd given the world what it needed. And now they returned to what they needed, each other. Months passed. Paris was still theirs, but they began to wander. Greece in the summer, Japan in the fall. A cabin in Norway when winter snowed the world into silence. They wrote, painted, recorded, not always for release, sometimes just for themselves. And one evening, in the lavender fields of Provence, Taehyung sat beside Jungkook under a sky of stars. Do you still think I forgot you? He asked. Jungkook looked at him, eyes soft. No, I think you tried too. Taehyung nodded, and now? Jungkook smiled, faint and true. Now I think you remember me in every breath. Taehyung leaned in, pressed a kiss to Jungkook's temple, lingering. I do. And Jungkook believed him. Not because the world did, but because, finally, the silence between them was gone. The lavender field stretched endlessly around them, dancing gently beneath the wind. The horizon bathed in the quiet, lingering warmth of dusk. The sky overhead bled into shades of pink and purple, gold clinging to the edges of the clouds like the last breath of daylight didn't want to leave. Jungkook sat in the grass, arms wrapped loosely around his knees, chin resting atop them as he watched the landscape blur with memory. Beside him, Taehyung lay on his back, one arm under his head, the other lazily tracing invisible shapes into the sky. The silence between them wasn't tense or hesitant anymore. It had become something sacred, something earned, something that no longer asked for filling. The world spoke around them in the rustle of flowers, in the chirp of distant crickets, in the breath that came easier now. It was Jungkook who broke the silence first, his voice low, barely above the wind. You know, for a long time I thought I'd never forgive you, not because of what you did, but because of what I became after. Taehyung turned his head toward him, his gaze soft, steady. What did you become? Jungkook's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Someone quieter, someone who learned to wait for things that never came. I carried your absence like it was my fault. Like if I had been just a little more something, maybe you would have said my name. Taehyung sat up slowly, brushing strands of hair from his face as he turned to face him completely. You've always been more than enough. I was just too scared to let enough be enough. The confession didn't surprise Jungkook anymore. They had said so many half-truths over the years, avoided so many mirrors, but now there was no fear left in being seen. "Are you still scared?" Jungkook asked, tilting his head. Taehyung thought about it, drawing a breath in through his nose. "I think I'm scared of different things now." "Like what?" "Like how deeply I love you," he said quietly, "and how much it took for me to finally say it. I'm scared of how easy it would be to fall back into silence, how fragile all of this still is." Jungkook didn't look away. "Then let's not let it be fragile." "And if we break again?" "Then we'll fix it again," Jungkook said. "Or we won't, but we'll be honest this time, that's the difference." Taehyung reached over, his fingers grazing Jungkook, hesitant for just a second before he laced them together with deliberate care. "You're the only thing I was ever sure of," Taehyung said, "even when I ran." Jungkook leaned forward and rested his forehead against Taehyung's shoulder. "Then don't run anymore." "I won't," Taehyung whispered, holding him, "even if the world does." They stayed like that as the stars emerged above them, one by one. Tiny declarations of light in the darkness. That night back in the cottage nestled behind the hills, they didn't need music or distractions. Jungkook lay in bed with his head on Taehyung's chest, listening to his heartbeat, their limbs tangled beneath thin sheets, the windows cracked open to let the cool air in. Taehyung traced lines along Jungkook's spine, featherlight, not to soothe him into sleep, but to remind himself he was real. "Do you think," Jungkook murmured, eyes closed, "that if we hadn't made it back to each other, you'd still be pretending?" Taehyung's fingers paused for a beat. "I don't know, maybe, probably, but I would have been miserable, and I think eventually I would have come back, even if it took years." Jungkook tilted his head up. "You did come back." "Too late," Taehyung replied, voice low. "But still in time," Jungkook said, "somehow." Their lips met then, quiet, unhurried, not like a first kiss, not like a last, just something true, something that had waited. It didn't demand fireworks. It didn't ask for redemption. It just was. In the days that followed, they wrote together, not for an album, not for anyone but themselves. It was therapy more than artistry. Taehyung wrote about regret, about childhood, about hands he used to reach for in the dark. Jungkook wrote about silence, about yearning, about the pain of being someone's almost. They didn't judge the words. They just let them come, and in doing so, they began to close the wounds that had once seemed too deep. Jungkook began recording demos again, this time in a makeshift studio they set up in the corner of the living room. The walls were uneven. The acoustics were imperfect. But the sound that came out was raw, unfiltered, unpretending. Taehyung's voice layered over Jungkook, in harmonies that were less about blending and more about balance, two distinct sounds finally learning how to exist beside each other without swallowing one whole. Word began to spread in the industry that they were working on something private. Offers came, invitations, proposals, but they declined them all. "We'll release it when it's ready," Taehyung told their old manager during a brief call. "And if it never is, then it never will be." But it was ready, not because it was polished, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. The EP was called After the Silence. 6 tracks, no label. They uploaded it quietly one midnight without promotion. And the world noticed anyway. Armies flooded the internet with messages of gratitude, heartbreak, awe. The music wasn't like anything they'd done before. It was stripped down, intimate. Each song felt like a letter never sent or a message left unsaid until now. There was no need for flashy choreography or music videos. The sound alone was enough. The final track was called Vows. It wasn't sung so much as spoken. Taehyung's voice. "I forgot to say your name, but I remembered how you looked when you were waiting for me too." Jungkook's voice answering. "I waited because I knew, somewhere inside you I still mattered, even if you never said it." Both voices together, and now we say it, not for the world, for each other. No outro, just silence, and then one piano note fading into nothing. After that they disappeared again, Not to run, but to live. They adopted a stray cat that kept returning to their window. Taehyung named it Echo. Jungkook hated the name but secretly thought it fit. They traveled to cities they hadn't explored before, Lisbon, Budapest, Cape Town, blending into the background, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, hands linked only when they knew no one was looking, and eventually, even when they did. There were still hard days, days when the past came clawing back, when old wounds reopened without warning, when Taehyung would wake from dreams where he was back in a tuxedo, forgetting Jungkook all over again, when Jungkook would find himself doubting whether this version of Taehyung could really stay. But they talked now, really talked, and that made all the difference. Years later, a journalist would ask Jungkook in a rare interview, "Do you believe in soulmates?" He didn't hesitate, "Yes." "Have you met yours?" A pause, a smile, "I forgave him." And somewhere in another room, Taehyung would be listening, quietly smiling as he added that quote to the wall above their piano, right next to a photo from Provence, and a note Jungkook once left in his sketchbook that simply read, "You never forgot me. You just needed time to remember how much I mattered." And for them, that time had come. Finally, completely, without silence. Rain poured over the windows of their small apartment in Kyoto, where the scent of early spring clung to the wood, and the sound of water filtered through narrow alleyways like a melody too old to name. Taehyung sat on the floor, barefoot, hair damp from a walk he had taken without an umbrella, sketchbook open in front of him, pencil poised yet unmoving. Across the room, Jungkook leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him, eyes unreadable. The silence between them wasn't cold or uncomfortable, but it was heavy with something that neither had spoken since the album release. Not fear, not guilt, but the kind of weight that came only when the world had heard your truth and demanded nothing more, yet your soul still whispered questions that hadn't been answered. Taehyung finally looked up. "You ever feel like people love the idea of us more than us?" Jungkook blinked slowly. "You mean army?" "No, everyone," Taehyung replied, voice soft, distant. "The public, strangers, even sometimes ourselves." Jungkook stepped into the room, his footsteps light. He sat beside him, not saying anything for a long time. The pages in Taehyung's sketchbook fluttered as a breeze came in from the barely opened window. The rain tapped against the glass like it was echoing something unspoken. Jungkook finally reached forward and closed the sketchbook gently, fingers resting on the cover. "Loving the idea of someone is easier," he said. "But loving someone's silence, their fear, their bad days, that's the real test." "And do you?" Taehyung asked, still. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. He looked at him instead, really looked, the same way he had the first time they met, when they were too young to know what this would become, when the world hadn't yet told them who they were allowed to love, who they were supposed to be. And now, after years of pretending, breaking, healing, and finding their way back, Jungkook's answer came not as a grand declaration, but as a whisper pulled from the deepest part of him. "Yes," he said, "especially now." Taehyung's eyes closed, just for a moment, as if letting those words settle into the parts of him that still felt unsure. When he opened them again, he reached for Jungkook's hand, placed it over his heart. "Sometimes I wake up and still think this isn't real." "Then I'll keep reminding you," Jungkook murmured, "until it is." They stayed like that as the rain continued. Later that evening, they walked through under a shared umbrella, the cobblestone streets glistening under paper lanterns, the scent of tea and sakura petals in the air. Tourists passed them by without recognition, a rare gift. In this place, they weren't idols. They weren't former bandmates or tabloid speculation. They were just two people in love, walking slowly, learning the rhythm of a life unchained from spectacle. Back at the apartment, they cooked together. Taehyung chopped garlic with quiet precision while Jungkook stirred broth, humming under his breath. It wasn't a song anyone knew, just something private. A tune that had no beginning or end, something that rose only when he was at peace. Taehyung paused to listen, then smiled. "You hum more these days," he said. You listen more, Jungkook replied. Dinner was quiet. Afterwards, they sat on the floor near the window, plates pushed aside, and Taehyung pulled out a box they hadn't opened in years. Letters, Polaroids, old tour memorabilia, scribbled notes on napkins, set lists from their earliest concerts stained with sweat and youth and dreams that didn't know yet how heavy they'd become. Jungkook picked up a photo of them backstage in 2016, both grinning like they hadn't learned heartbreak yet. Would you go back? Jungkook asked, tapping the edge of the photo. Taehyung shook his head. No, I wouldn't change it. Even the parts that broke us. Especially those, Taehyung whispered, because they led us here. They slept tangled in blankets on the floor that night, not because they had to, but because it felt right. When Jungkook stirred in the early hours, he found Taehyung already awake, watching him with an expression that was both reverent and raw. Marry me, Taehyung said suddenly. Jungkook blinked. What? Taehyung sat up, heart beating visibly in his throat. Not tomorrow. Not next week, just someday, when the world is quiet, when there's nothing to prove, just us. Jungkook stared at him for a long time. Then, without a word, he sat up too, reached for Taehyung's face and kissed him. It wasn't an answer, it was a promise. And that was enough. News never broke of a wedding. No official announcements. No rings flashed online. But fans noticed how Taehyung wore a silver band on a chain around his neck now. How Jungkook's lyrics began to speak more of quiet mornings and shared lives than heartbreak and longing. How they were seen more often, not apart but near. One always in the background of the other's frame, laughter caught in motion, hands brushing too naturally to be staged. Years passed. Music came and went, awards, tour, new collaborations, but the noise never touched them the same way. They had learned to leave space between the world and their truth. They bought a home in Jeju away from the city where the air tasted of salt and pine and the ocean knew all their secrets. Taehyung planted herbs. Jungkook built shelves. They rescued a dog named Mido. Life didn't shout anymore. It whispered. On the anniversary of their first song release, they released another. No fanfare, no press. Just a single link captioned with one sentence, for those who waited with us. The track was called Quiet Forever. No chorus, just verses braided into one another like breath. You waited in silence. And I kept forgetting. But now in your name, I find myself again. It wasn't a chart topper. It wasn't meant to be. But it lived in playlists and hearts, in weddings and headphones and letters people wrote but never sent. In a quiet town years later, a girl asked her mother, "Do you believe in love that comes back?" And her mother played her that song. Jungkook and Taehyung were never perfect. They never tried to be, but they were real. And realness in a world that asked them to be everything else was the greatest rebellion. And so they lived, not loudly, not always together in the spotlight, but side by side through storms and sunrises, forgetting sometimes, but always remembering in the end. The morning light in Jeju fell in slanted beams through the half-open shutters, soft and golden, touching the wooden floorboards with warmth that crept slowly across the room. Outside, the sea murmured against the rocks, a low lullaby of movement and breath, and birds called lazily to one another across the quiet landscape. Inside their home, the world moved slower. Jungkook stood in the kitchen barefoot, shirt slightly wrinkled, hair a mess of dark strands from sleep, one hand wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee while the other traced absent-minded circles on the counter's worn edge. He didn't look up when Taehyung stepped into the room. He didn't need to. He felt him before he saw him, his presence like a shift in the air, the gravity in the room tilting slightly toward something familiar and grounding. Taehyung didn't speak at first. He walked silently toward the window and opened it wider, letting the scent of salt and pine drift in. The breeze carried the smell of earth still damp from last night's rain, and the rustling of leaves filled the silence like a hymn. He turned slowly, eyes falling on Jungkook, who now stood facing him, still silent, still watching. "I dreamt of the past," Taehyung said softly, voice just above a whisper. Of that stage, of you walking away after I said my vows. Jungkook's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly on the mug. Do you still dream of that? Only when I forget to believe I deserve this, Taehyung admitted, stepping closer. Us. Jungkook looked at him for a long moment, eyes dark and unreadable, and then he placed the mug down carefully before reaching forward and taking Taehyung's hand. He didn't say anything. He just guided him into an embrace, arms wrapping tightly around his waist, face pressed into the curve of his neck like he was anchoring himself there. Taehyung exhaled slowly, his hands resting on Jungkook's back, their bodies fitting together with a familiarity that had taken years to earn and minutes to restore. You do, Jungkook murmured. Even when you forget, I'll remember for you. They stayed like that until the room was fully lit by morning, until the warmth between them overpowered the chill from the window, until silence gave way to movement again. Taehyung's hand tracing slow lines down Jungkook's spine, Jungkook's lips brushing against the edge of Taehyung's jaw like a punctuation mark to a sentence only they understood. Later that afternoon, they walked along the coastline where the cliffs met the sea, the wind tangling their hair and the sky a vast wash of muted blue. They didn't talk much. They never needed to. But Jungkook carried his camera again, and Taehyung brought his sketchbook. They stopped beside a twisted tree that grew out of the rock like it was defying time, and while Taehyung sat down and began to draw, Jungkook raised his lens and started to capture pieces of the world that felt too fleeting to trust memory alone. Click Taehyung's profile in the light. Click the curve of the waves below. Click a shadow across their joined hands. He turned the camera on Taehyung and lowered it slowly, smiling. You never looked the same through the lens. Taehyung looked up. How do I look now? Like someone who finally knows where he belongs. And where is that? Jungkook stepped forward, crouched beside him, rested his forehead against Taehyung's. Here, with me, wherever that is. The rest of the day passed in that soft, slow way only people in love ever fully understand. They cooked dinner together. No rush, no measurements, just instinct and laughter and the occasional brush of flour against a cheek. They danced barefoot in the kitchen while a jazz record crackled on the player, Taehyung spinning Jungkook unexpectedly and catching him just before he stumbled. They fell asleep tangled in the couch cushions, the movie forgotten, the fire in the hearth flickering shadows across their sleeping forms. Time passed as it always does, not with noise but with the quiet passage of ordinary days. And in those ordinary days, they built something that lasted. Their home filled with tiny evidences of their life together, paintings half-finished, songs scribbled on napkins, Polaroids stuck to the fridge with mismatched magnets, a small vase of dried lavender in the corner that Taehyung refused to throw away because it reminded him of the field where Jungkook first said stay. A mug Jungkook had broken and glued back together because Taehyung had once said it was his favorite, even though it clearly was. A bench by the garden where they sat during storms, where once without planning or ceremony they had quietly exchanged rings. Not gold, not silver, just braided black thread around their fingers, tied in silence, sealed with a kiss. They didn't call it marriage. They didn't need to. It was theirs. And though they never made an announcement, the world knew. In time, the public stopped asking. The rumors faded. What remained was a quiet reverence, an understanding that whatever existed between Jungkook and Taehyung was beyond explanation. It wasn't just romance. It was history. It was a bond forged in pain and patience and the kind of love that didn't just survive silence but was made from it. When they returned to Seoul for a tribute show years later, older, wiser, more themselves than ever before, they stood on that same stage with the 6 others, now men shaped by time and separation and memory. They sang the old songs, the anthems, the ones that had held nations together. But when the final note rang out, when the lights dimmed and the cheers faded into an ocean of waving hands, Jungkook turned to Taehyung, reached for his hand and held it openly. No fear. No hesitation. Only truth. The crowd did not scream. They did not gasp. They just stood in silence and then applauded not the performance but the journey, not the spectacle but the survival, because they had seen it too. The forgetting, the silence, the name unsaid, and now the hand held. Back in their dressing room, Taehyung stood before the mirror, slowly removing his jacket, his shirt, the microphone pack. He caught Jungkook's reflection beside him, leaning in the doorway, watching. "You look peaceful up there," Jungkook said. Taehyung smiled, setting down the last piece of his outfit. "I was, for the first time." Jungkook walked over, wrapped his arms around him from behind, their reflection now a single shape. "You didn't forget anything this time." "No," Taehyung whispered, closing his eyes as he leaned back into him. "I remembered everything." And in that mirror, in that quiet room, surrounded by memories they had finally made peace with, there were no ghosts left. Only two men who had learned that forgetting is sometimes a part of remembering, that silence is sometimes the beginning of the loudest truths, that love, real love, doesn't need to be proven, only protected. Jungkook pressed a kiss to the back of Taehyung's neck and whispered something that was not for the world to hear. And Taehyung smiled, eyes still closed, heart still open. Because he knew. He was home,